of the things about being the last speaker of the day is that everything I wanted to say has already been said by various speakers. So what we'll do is, I'll go through the charts and then we can maybe tie it in more into a discussion. That'll be more interesting. The new god that we have called Wikipedia has informed me that Chindia is a phrase that was coined by Jairam Ramesh. Is that true? Yeah.
That's what Jairam
is very good at, yes.
He claims many things.
I don't know if he claims it, but whenever I've heard him, he's got a good turn of phrase, so I think it may well be true. But to me, I mean, I really don't know what he meant by Chindia. But to me, what I'm trying to do when I say Chindia, fact or fiction, is see that what are the similarities and what are the differences. And it doesn't mean that we're going to become one country culturally or one country economically or whatever, right? So that's really what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to see where we are today and are we on the same path, are we on a different path, and what can we learn from each other. So, various estimates. I have to press something else to move it from there. Okay, so various estimates. This one shocked me a bit because the last time I had seen some estimates, it said in 2025 we will overtake China. Then I saw 2020. So in 5 years' time we're going to be bigger than China, right? Which is pretty staggering. And on the surface, as we've been discussing, a lot is common. We both started at about the same time. This one, right? Okay. So we both started in our present incarnations of nations at about the same time. We were both fairly state regulated, and we both started to liberalize in the 90s. And of course, for the next 50 years, people are going to talk about India and they're going to talk about China. Because really, that's where the growth is going to come from the world. But,
Slight correction, China started to liberalize in 1979. We are 79. We are about 14 years, 12 years ahead.
yes, but, okay, fair enough.
That's
But we also started some amount of liberalization in the 80s.
It's not worth talking about.
Okay.
The real thing was 91.
So you don't consider Rajiv Gandhi's efforts
No,
at liberalization?
let's not get into that. Sorry. Sorry to
But there are major differences. For example, I was surprised, I didn't realize that in 1950 we were a more urbanized nation than China. And as you can see from the trajectory, we obviously have not invested in urbanization or in urban infrastructure. If we look at the amounts, China spends twice as much as a percentage of GDP, and of course their GDP is so much higher than ours, in infrastructure. And in absolute terms, almost 7 times, right? So that's where we are. Press two things together. In education as well, we have a pathetic women's literacy ratio today, and I don't see that changing in the foreseeable future. When we look at the level of education, primary education, China is, secondary education, China is so much higher than us. And also in terms of PISA scores, and I think I'm talking to academics here, so you know this better than us, that Shanghai scored the highest on all the PISA scores. We were number 2 from the bottom. And in India, they tested Tamil Nadu and I think Himachal, because within India, Tamil Nadu and Himachal are considered the better states. So had they tested some of the other states, I don't know where we would have been. If you can fall off the bottom, then that's where we would have been. So that's the reality for education at the secondary level. If you look at tertiary education, then China in the last 15 years, to the point that you were making, has doubled its number of universities. Enrollments are higher. And the last point really was astonishing for me, that 17% of global research output today comes from China. Versus ours, which, well, non-existent practically. So in every sense of the very basics, we are a long, long way off from catching up. Not only are they much richer, the gap is widening, we all know this. And today the Chinese behave like a developing country in that their disposable income is as much as nearly more than half. This figure is for estimates for 2020, where their disposable income is expected to be as high as 60%. Ours hopefully will get to only about 40%. International travel was being discussed. Now, you quoted a figure of 110 million, this says 100, give or take a few, compared to ours. It might seem that all these package tour ads that we see, everybody in India is traveling, but obviously we're a long way off. Now, again, to the point that you made earlier today, that a lot of this is people traveling to Macau and Hong Kong as well. But the interesting thing is that when the Chinese are traveling abroad, there's some work done to show what they're traveling for, and 9 out of 10 times it's shopping. It's not for sightseeing, it's not for seeing, learning about the different countries. And Chinese have now shown themselves to be the highest spenders when they travel abroad. Per capita spending on foreign travel is the highest amongst the Chinese, most of it going into shopping. There are examples of Chinese staying in 2-star hotels but going to Harrods and buying luxury goods. So the objective of travel is very different. It also shows you to some extent what's important for the consumers. Okay, so in some ways their behavior is getting closer to developed nations. So for example, we see that modern retail, which has had a very, very torturous journey in all emerging markets, has started to make its presence felt because finally they got their act together. The issues were that they started with hypermarkets and have discovered that hypermarket formats don't work too well in Asian economies because we have smaller houses, don't have cars, etc., etc. But anyway, modern establishment of modern trade for FMCG companies certainly is a measure of development. And China today, about a third of all FMCG is sold through modern trade, whereas in India it's still less than a fifth. Chinese consumers, because modern trade is getting more established, are buying bigger baskets, meaning buying more things per trip with fewer trips, which is again a very Western way of shopping. They are less sensitive to price promotions today. And the interesting thing is that while initially they were more concerned about the price of products, and they weren't that sensitive to quality within premium products. Chinese consumers today are actually very discerning about quality products. So fake, comments like, if I buy a fake Louis Vuitton, then what's the point? Because I know I'm using a fake Louis Vuitton. Whereas 15, 20 years ago, even in Hong Kong, you could buy fake Louis Vuittons. And that doesn't happen anymore. They've all been ruined. So they're beginning to look beyond the product features. And this is where we say that this is the stage in consumerism where you start getting into the brand value element of it. So the imagery of the brand, the reputation of the brand starts playing a big role. And it's important for consumer marketing companies to understand that. A good example is that when Mercedes launched in China first, they came in with a lower priced model. And they did pretty badly because their view was that the Chinese may not be able to afford the top end. But the reason why they did badly was that the people who were willing to buy Mercedes wanted to buy a top end, or else they would buy a Mercedes. And what's the point of buying a second order or third order Mercedes? So that's again a very interesting pattern that's happening. And the other thing is that the products are being researched endlessly. And we'll talk a little bit about this when I talk about e-commerce. Chinese consumers are getting very savvy about the products that they buy, which is again a developed level of consumerism. But we've discussed this, growth has not been inclusive at all. This is the household disposable income by the 10 deciles of population. So the top 10% and the second 10%, so the top 20% in China account for 56% of all household income. Okay? In India also it's quite skewed, but not as much. So in India the top 20% account for 46% of household income. So if you go down to the bottom 20% of Chinese population, then they probably account for no more than about less than 5 to 10% of the total consumption. So this will give you an idea of how disparate the population is. And we've been talking about this all day. However, since the top 20% in numbers is substantial, it's still a very, very large market for top-end products. So when we look at the global luxury market, 20% of the sales happens in China, point one. Point two is Chinese are buying outside of China luxury goods when they travel, because one of the reasons for that is taxation apparently is very high in China. So you can buy the same product cheaper elsewhere than you can in China. And a spin-off to that is a lot of that is happening in terms of e-commerce. So apparently they can buy, what they're doing is that they're aggregating purchases to minimize shipping costs and buying online and then getting it shipped for a group of people together into China. So that's again very savvy consumerism, I would say. You were going to say something?
No, I said it's group buying.
Yes, it's group buying. So they're aggregating purchases to minimize shipping costs. I mean, this is all signs of a society that's getting more and more consumeristic, if you like. Okay? So it's on track to be the second largest market for luxury goods. US is the first. Some slowdown has happened, and this goes back to the clampdown on corruption which we were talking about. Because all of the work that McKinsey has done, and based on the interviews, they say that the lavish gifting that used to happen, which was another way of handling corruption or paying off corruption, all that has been cut down. And which is why my comment earlier that maybe this 80 people were invited and a big noise made, maybe not so much for effect in a direct sense, but more to let everybody else know, guys, watch out. We're going to look at what you're doing. I don't know. So that could be one reason. So certainly slowdown in luxury markets has happened, but it's still on track. And people do expect that it will soon overtake Japan as the second largest luxury market. Okay, moving track. Everybody knows Mao said women hold up half the sky. We have seen earlier that literacy amongst women in China is almost on par with literacy amongst men. And that naturally leads to a much higher proportion of working women than in India, with much higher disposable incomes. And women are the decision makers for a whole range of product categories. I was very surprised to read that in men's apparel in China, women are the decision makers. So communication for men's apparel is directed at women. Hands up, how many people here have women in their families buying clothes for them? Okay, a few brave people, good. Right, so, well, I don't know if the Chinese men would admit it, but that is the behavioral pattern, okay? So that's an interesting thing. This is a very interesting piece of work that was done for an SMR paper, where they've plotted women's emancipation vis-a-vis social optimism, okay? And as you can see, China is very high on the emancipation, women's emancipation role, as you would expect. And because the women generally have it as good or as bad as the men, they're fairly optimistic. I have to admit this study was done in 2008, which is why Spain probably is still so optimistic. I doubt that today anybody in Spain would score high on optimism. But overall, I think the patterns wouldn't change too much other than that. Because Chinese women, historically, and I think Alka and the others would know much better, have come in the last century from having their feet bound to where they are, to being practically forced to be unisex, to being where they are today, which is, you know, at the high end of fashion and everything. So there really is definitely an optimism there, quite clearly. Okay, this one, we've discussed many parts of it, and some of it is going to be repetition. But compliant versus rebellious, anybody has a different point of view over here? Or does everybody think that this pretty much fits the bill? Yeah? No needs to explain that. This one we talked about a bit, egalitarian versus classism. And I think the point here is that, as has been said this morning, Chinese society is also very hierarchical, but because traditionally they had this imperial exam system, anybody could aspire through hard work and performance to go up in class. Okay? And that is a major difference within Indian society. Because in Indian society, that opportunity to rise with your own performance was not available to us. It's happened now. I think business schools have leveled the playing field for a certain segment of society considerably. I had classmates who had been shop floor workers and then came to do an MBA with us way back in the 70s, and then obviously totally changed their career path going forward. But I think generally in the Indian society, this whole meritocracy system did not exist. And today, even today doesn't exist. There is change and there's improvement, but not that much. The other one I think is pretty obvious. Anybody who's taken a train journey in India.
Wouldn't quota and all the cram schools challenge your comment on that?
I would.
The fact that the entrance to the IITs, entrance to the medical profession is through a highly competitive and pretty fair process.
Yes, but what percentage of our population is actually going into the IITs, medicals and IITs?
What proportion are sitting for the exams? That is the question.
Yeah.
Much higher number sitting for
You know,
the
the quota system, I think the academicians here would know better than me, but from what I hear, that the quota students are also require a lot of extra guidance to get through. So I don't know.
No, I said quota, not quota.
Oh, quota, K-O-T.
Quota, that's right.
IIT
Quota
exam
cram
quota.
process.
Yes.
It's an extraordinary phenomenon.
Yes,
That a
it
place
is.
that was simply a railway crossing point became the center of a whole cram industry.
Yes. Yes. But is a cram, I was told by an Calcutta professor that today the students who join an MBA program are, you know, have learned the art of mastering CAT rather than be the brightest students in the country. And his view, and he's much younger than me, so you know, he's talking of an era, he said when he started teaching, even in the 90s, there were questions asked to him in class that he couldn't answer. He says, today, I don't face that. Not because I've gotten better, but because the students who are coming are CAT experts. So I don't know, as I said, I'm talking to a group of academicians here.
Quota also makes you crack CAT, that's all.
Yes, quota
Not
or
that
crack or
doesn't
G
make you
or
crack.
whatever.
No, but the point is that there is a process. I mean, it's an open
The process
process
is not
which is
cat-centric.
egalitarian.
The process is CAT-centric.
But it is egalitarian.
How does it matter?
It does matter because the point made was that is it the criterion is egalitarian. And
Yes.
I would submit that it is an egalitarian process. Everybody is equal there.
Yes, for the entrance
That's the
exam,
point.
you're right, everybody's equal. But I think the point I was making was that going back in
The
time,
UPSC exam, everybody is equal there. And there is really, I mean, even the interview, which was the one place where favoritism did take place, UPSC now is very much egalitarian.
If we move beyond educational institutions. I mean, this would necessarily not just
No, but-
refer to education, but would refer to across the society many other institutions.
Yeah, but the, I
Then,
think,
then I would say that you would have to question, is this China?
yeah, no, the
egalitarian?
example
No,
I
principles.
gave was the
No,
imperial
principles are
exam
egalitarian.
system.
So in terms of the location, the Princeton would be as small a number as.
No, but they occupy the highest position.
But then here also.
But here also you have
Oh,
Princeton.
yes, I know.
I think across the society, making a general point,
Yeah.
it would on the whole be true because this.
No, definitely I think there's change happening. So for example, I would see that this rise of Dalit entrepreneurs as being meritocracy in many ways, which is, but it's counter to the
China didn't
traditional.
have a
Like
system
what-
where they have to go through those ceilings.
Yeah.
It's like the question, what caste are you?
Yes.
I mean, that figures from top to bottom. So in that sense, the sense of these caste.
Yeah. Caste and class also, I think. In India, it's both.
Except the
Because-
caste and caste.
Go together as well, traditionally. Okay. Okay, reticent and social. I think anybody who's taken a train journey in India knows that by the end of the train journey, everybody is best friends, right? That certainly doesn't happen in China. And one of the studies that I came across was that where a lot of the urban Chinese are saying that I never interact with my neighbor. Okay? We don't see that here. So ours is much more of a social and environment. The next one we've all talked about, harmony and confrontation. And I think a lot of discussion has happened on this earlier today. We are confrontational. In fact, one of the things that has been observed and written about is, from the 90s onwards, Indian MNCs started exporting Indian managers, certainly to the Southeast Asia and sometimes and eventually later to the US as well. And a large proportion of them petered out because of their lack of interpersonal skills.
How can you say that? In a world where the largest number of non-white CEOs are Indians, how that challenges your statement?
No, it doesn't. Because Indra Nui was my classmate, so having 5 or 6 Indians make it as
20,
CEOs,
20.
okay, 20, having 20 make it as CEOs doesn't mean that the rest of them were all doing very well.
Many people are recruiting for the world out of India.
Yeah.
I'm
Master,
sorry to.
there is a change in the Indian executives of the last 10 years versus those who graduated in the 70s, 80s and 90s. I said that when they started I can give you, just as you're giving me names, I can offhand tell you about at least a dozen people within Levers, within Pepsi, within P&G to whom this has been an issue. Okay? So Indians are very, very confrontational. We are, as you yourself said, we're argumentative Indians, and this is what we thrive in. And this is what works in corporate culture.
But please note that the Chinese do not exactly seek harmony. I think that is where there is a little bit of a.
I don't know.
I mean, what would you say? Do the Chinese seek harmony?
They like to confirm, and if they have to differ, they would do it in private. They wouldn't have an open forum and keep
Oh, and
popping
the
up
other
and saying,
thing
I
is that
disagree, I
They
disagree.
would go around it.
Yeah, they would go around
They
it,
would
they'll
go
find
around
you
the
later
problem.
and in private they will disagree.
But arguing with your boss is not uncommon in Indian environment. Not traditional Indian environment. This is the other interesting thing. Nobody argues with the Sethji. But a young and sort of, 2-year-old brand manager will argue with his marketing director, and it's encouraged in MNCs. But it doesn't work in the US. You can't argue with your boss's boss. So it's probably talking of a very specific corporate culture here. Okay, the other thing is safety and structure versus what Rama Bijapurkar calls in her book, we are like that only, which is whatever we do is okay. And to me, the biggest example of this was when I saw this picture of the 9 or 11 day traffic jam that happened in China It's a bird's eye view, but the interesting thing is that you can actually see space between the lines of cars. Okay? This is what happens on Indian roads every day. Alright? And as somebody, one of the McKinsey consultants said that when he visited India, he felt that the way Indians drive is analogous to the way they see their life. Because Indians drive as the crow flies. That to that is my shortest distance, and I will drive that way. I live on a road that's a one-way street, and it's very narrow. It's barely, if one car is coming the wrong way, then everybody is stuck. And every day one of the residents is going the wrong way. Not somebody from the outside who doesn't know. And the simple answer is, why should I go around? Why should I go around the block when I can go from here to there very easily? So that's an 11-day or 9-day traffic jam with everybody still in their lines, knowing that they can't move forward. And that, of course, is a daily picture. All right. I'm going to move a little bit now and talk about, in marketing communication terms, what certain archetypes that we know what their different nuances are between India and China. Actually, how many people here are interested in marketing as a career? Brand management as a career? Okay, not that much. All right. Okay. It may be a bit boring for the others, but bear with me. So the three archetypes that I'm going to talk about are the hero, the ruler, and the regular guy. Okay? So the hero really, in every story, in every language, there is a hero. And we'll talk about how Indian heroes and the Chinese heroes are different. But in all cultures, a hero represents courage and achievement. Okay, so talking about the, okay, in the Chinese communication, if you see advertising for Chinese brands, then the hero always plays by the rules. And the hero achieves his hero status by his sheer hard work. And in India, in contrast, a hero is somebody who succeeds against all odds. And the ultimate hero is the angry young man. Okay? So Amitabh Bachchan kind of epitomized the Indian hero, where he would just succeed against anything. And I think one of the reasons this happens is that in the Chinese system, people expect that if you work hard, you will do well. And I'm not sure that that is necessarily ingrained in our society. And please feel free to disagree or jump in or whatever, because as I said, this is all very subjective. We're moving away from facts and figures here into our understanding of culture and understanding of society, and I'm sure two people will have very different rules here. So, next archetype that we're talking about is the ruler, and the ruler is somebody obviously who needs to demonstrate his position. And again, in India, you demonstrate your position by being loud and over the top. Okay? So you demonstrate your position by building an antenna. But in China, less so conspicuous and obvious. In China, you can show off, but again, to the point somebody made earlier, that you have to save the other person's face. You cannot show up somebody else. Yeah? So this is again, in communication terms, this is a very important distinction. And there's a brand of, what's that? Onida, right? Which was, I don't know how many of you remember, Onida was very, very successful. It brought the brand from nowhere to somewhere, showing a devil, yes, you're doing the devil thing, saying, neighbors envy, owners pride, right? Which is the ultimate show-off statement you can think of. That sort of advertising would not happen in China, would never be successful in China. The closest that's come to it has been a diamond brand, and I can't remember the name, where very subtly they show a lady looking at a mirror, but actually it's a one-way glass. It's a two-way, one-way mirror. So on the other side, somebody sees her, can see her and is admiring her diamonds. And when she realizes that, she says, "Can I help it if they are admiring my diamonds, right? So on the overt thing, she's not showing off her diamonds, she's admiring them herself, but somebody else sees her and is jealous. So they're again going in a roundabout way of showing the one-upmanship. But here everybody's one-up, you know. If you look at the advertising for any health drink, the person who drinks Horlicks is better dressed than the ones who don't drink it. The person, you know, the hero of the advertising film is always smarter, better, the kid is brighter, or whatever. So the one-upmanship is very much there over here. Okay, then we look at the regular guy, and in India the regular guy is not aspirational. Lakshman's cartoon of the common man, who's the ultimate regular guy. You have empathy for the person, you laugh at his problems, you sympathize with him, but how many of you want to be Lakshman's common guy? Anybody? Nobody, right? Whereas in China, one of the interesting ads that I think did very well was for a delivery company, and they showed that this delivery man, it's Chinese New Year, he has to go home for have dinner with his family, but he has to make these deliveries because there are other people who are waiting for it, and he goes against all odds, and there's a whatever, rain, blizzard, something, and he still does it, and he perseveres, and he delivers all the product, and then he goes home just as his family is sitting down to dinner. And that's considered, you know, it had great traction because, again, he's working hard and going through a lot of odds to get there. Okay, so that's the broad picture, but there is a new generation emerging in China, definitely, and here as well. So when you look at the youth, and this is a survey amongst people who are 24 to 34, I think, working young adults, and clearly the differences are very narrow, okay? So, as I like to call it, materialism is here to stay, because whether you're Chinese or whether you're Indian, statements like, I like to own things that impress people, things I own say a lot of how well I'm doing in life, all of this is strongly agreed to. These are scores on a 5-point scale, top end being 5, and I think all scores here range between 4 and 5. I haven't put the numbers down because it's for a particular client. I admire people who own expensive things. The youth in China and India view the world much more similarly. And in fact, this also leads on to some other work that's been done, which shows that the young Chinese are really becoming more of global citizens today, because with the exposure, with the money, and with everything that they have going around. Okay, Alka talked about it today. Internet has definitely been a game changer for China. It's been a game changer everywhere, including here, but much more obviously in China, which has led to them, the interesting thing is that though there are many, many more internet users, Indians on average spend a lot more on the internet, time on the internet, than the Chinese do. This is time spent on the internet on average. And the reason I think is really because India has leapfrogged into the mobile internet. 70% of Indians who access the net access it on their mobile. In China, it's divided between, and some multiple of course, but a large percentage still do it on their laptops or PCs, which is more of a desk-bound thing. If you've got your net with your mobile with you and that's your primary source of accessing the internet, then you're going to spend more time on the net anyway on that. So in this way, there's a term that we used to use earlier when it first telecom came into China, that China has leapfrogged into mobile phones, because for most people, and that happened in India as well, their first phone was a mobile phone. They'd never used a landline phone before. So they jumped straight into mobiles. And that same thing is happening in India as far as the internet is concerned. And some estimates, So given the larger number of Chinese who are internet users, a large part of their purchases are now online. In fact, some estimates are putting China as the largest e-commerce market. I'm saying some estimates because there seem to be different estimates going around. This one is taking all online sales, which is B2B or B2C, or C2C, which is a very big segment in China, which is resale from one consumer to another consumer. So taking everything together, the Chinese are spending 1.5 times what the US is online. And obviously, if you compare it with India, then the percentage who have bought online in the last month is more than double. Okay, if you just take the B2C segment, which is businesses to India, to consumers, then China is number 2 after the US, but with very different characteristics. One of them, of course, being, as I mentioned, that they buy luxury products from abroad and have them brought here. But other than that, they're growing much faster. So the Chinese e-commerce B2C business is growing twice as fast as the one in the US. India is growing fast, but on a very, very low base. Penetration in China is getting to US levels, again, somewhere in the middle between the US and India. The interesting thing to me was that though the Indian e-commerce market is expected to grow, people are expecting that the ARPU, which is the average revenue per user, is actually going to drop. And I couldn't think of a reason why. The only thing I can think of is that maybe because the base is going to get much wider, you're going to have fewer, less expensive products being purchased. But everywhere else, the ARPU is expected to more than double over the next 4 or 5 years. So where does that leave us? This is our big whiteboard. We touched upon it yesterday, I think, when we were talking at dinner. And this is what everybody talks about. The aging China will mean this is our opportunity. True, the figures for China here are 2025. Figures for India are 2050. So even a quarter of a century later, we will still be a predominantly young population. And we will obviously therefore have a much larger working age population than China. The question is that can we educate them and train them to be employed? Because we've seen the quality of education that we have today. And certainly all the work that has been done amongst employers says that many of them find when they employ graduate engineers today, and I think Ambassador was talking about these 2,000 MBAs, universities that are giving out MBA degrees, many of them are unemployed, according to the people who are employing them. So it's not just getting people through the system and giving them the degree, but actually making them useful. So that's, I think, one of our biggest challenges. We've talked a bit about growth slowing down and etc. 2 sets of numbers for this year. According to some people, we will grow faster than China this year, according to Euromonitor. According to World Bank, this year China will still grow faster than us. Next year we'll be on par. But I think the broad picture is clear that everybody is agreed that India will grow faster than China. But even though we will grow faster than China, because of the level that they are, markets will still always be much larger than us, with a much larger middle class. So as a manufacturer, a Western manufacturer specifically looking for investments in where should I focus? Of course, you have to be in both countries. But China will be more attractive, particularly with the top of the products for a long time to come. But I think the word convergence is wrong. I've used it wrongly. I think some similarities are beginning to be clear. I personally was very surprised that 48% of China's GDP is in the service sector, because whenever we talk of China, we say China is manufacturing and we are service, but 48% versus 53% for India is not that huge of a difference. as a
So there is some
percentage terms,
categorization, the definitions are slightly varying.
are different
Yeah.
between the
So
two.
there's many people point out, I don't know, I'm not a statistician, but when you mention the categories, I think there are some, for example, construction,
Is considered service.
they look at it as service, or there are some anomalies.
This is from a
which make it-
McKinsey report actually, so I would have thought that they would have taken care of that.
No, I think the flaw lies in where the data is actually
The
collected.
source data,
Yeah,
yes.
so if the Chinese government is giving out data,
Yes.
they have some categories which are not on
Not
par
same.
with the international sort of categories. So I
yeah.
think construction is one of them.
Okay.
Or some
It's
types of
definitely
construction.
something to look into because frankly these numbers go totally contrary.
This is what
To
I've
the
heard everyone
impression
says this. If
that-
you remove that particular category,
Then the
then it
numbers
dips
change.
a little bit, but
Yeah.
still I think it's about more than 40%.
Yeah, so it's like, it's not the China, and actually manufacturing, again, maybe that same definition will apply, is only 37% of China's GDP, right? So in that sense, if you look at the way the Chinese are presenting their figures, then whatever, 40% odd, 48% is services and 37% is manufacturing. So services is larger
I
than
think they look at a
manufacturing.
lot of ancillary services for manufacturing
As services. Yeah, could be, I don't know.
So I think that's, I don't remember what exactly, but there are a few categories which
Yeah.
don't match with international accepted definition.
Yeah,
Short 1 minute intervention.
sure,
The basic difference is the Chinese calculate GDP based on production, not
Yes.
expenditure. India calculates the GDP as per expenditure. So how much is consumed is the GDP figure. That is the actual GDP, has to be. The Chinese Chinese consider GDP as the production. So whatever the product, services they're producing, they're thinking that it's a part of GDP, which is not the case actually. Just an intervention.
so again,
if there are
you're saying the same point, while Santosh is saying that this is different categories, and you're saying that you're comparing
Yeah,
apples
because
and
the
oranges.
basic data of the basic calculation the Chinese use is Soviet style. They are changing it to STP actually, but it will take time. Chinese calculate GDP, how much they produce.
Mhm.
That is the story which will tell you. Doesn't matter
The
if it
GDP
is consumed or not.
Is production, right?
No, it's expenditure actually. India calculates based on expenses. How much we are buying it, how much we are consuming it, how much the consumer is spending it. It's all about expenses actually. But Chinese are not doing it. It's production, basically just the production. And Chinese are still stick to that.
So the word production is actually
How much a factory is producing, it's not about the money and the transactions are taking place. It's a static data. So it is the factories
So
producing.
no, what I
the
said
number
is
of
the
factories.
P in GDP.
Yeah.
Is
Is
gross
to be
domestic
ignored.
production.
It's to be ignored.
No, but there is also gross domestic consumption that the World Bank reports. The World Bank reports two different estimates,
That's
right? So when the World Bank is reporting estimates for China,
Yes.
they must be standardizing it. Otherwise, they
GDP
wouldn't report two different estimates.
Actually, but GDP.
I don't know. I'm not a statistician.
Yeah.
Maybe we can take this offline and
Definitely.
look at the World
I
Bank
just wanted
reports
to
to
just point out
understand
that
that.
there are a lot of
No, there are different definitions, but
Yeah,
the
that's
World Bank reports GDP and GDC.
both.
It reports both, right? So I would be surprised if they're reporting GDC and calling it GDP. That's my point.
Actually, there would be a difference if you calculate one at the production side, one at the consumption side. Because that value addition and what is
Yes,
that
of
amount,
course.
that is
Of
the
course there
difference.
would be a difference, which is why they report two different statistics. That's my point.
That's
Right?
why there would
Okay.
be.
So anyway, I think we've seen and we've talked about the fact that the rural consumers, certainly in India we know they're left behind, and so are they in China. But both countries are trying to be more inclusive, and the rural consumers, because they have had less exposure, are likely to be far more similar in terms of their consumerism. And that's the aspect that I'm talking about. So there will be more similarities in the new consumers that are coming into the consumer base. And the other thing, of course, is that, and this, this is really should be ingrained in all Western organizations' brains, is that neither India nor China nor Japan has ever behaved like the US markets do. I worked for a US MNC, and certainly we had clients even before that with several US companies. They all believed that the moment people had money, they would all become like American consumers, right? But that isn't how it's happened. Neither has the affluent Indian started behaving exactly like an American does, nor has the affluent Chinese. They have all developed in their own ways, and therefore most companies, particularly food companies, have had to customize. A fish burger that McDonald's sells in India is unique. The concept of a fish burger, I don't think exists anywhere else. Similarly, Yum brands, Kentucky Fried Chicken and whatever,
And that's why
Kellogg's
Kellogg's
doesn't
doesn't sell.
Kellogg's doesn't sell lots of things. Tang, for instance, the soft drink, is positioned internationally as a breakfast drink. Years ago, when they first came to India and we did work with them, and Indian consumers said, but we drink milk at breakfast. And then how can you have orange juice and milk? It'll curdle. And the Americans couldn't understand that because they drink milk and they drink orange juice all in the same meal. But Indians believe that if you have orange juice and milk in the same meal, well, it's going to curdle anyway in your stomach because there's acid in your stomach. But they believe that if you drink it together, it's going to curdle. And that's bad. So orange juice has never taken off in India. Maggi, for example, when it was launched, Nestle, they found they could never replace rice or chapati. So Maggi very cleverly replaced it as a snack. Because in the snack peripheral, you can come in. So Indianization and similarly Chineseization, I don't know what the word should be. All companies have Sinoization. Sinicization. All organizations have learned that they have to localize. So that's another business similarity that they've got to deal with. Okay? So really both are growth markets. Nobody can afford. In the 90s, when I first went to work in China, multinationals were still, I went from India and I went to work in China, and multinationals were still saying, should we invest in India or should we invest in China? I think that's a dead story, right? They know they have to invest in both. They're both going to grow over the next 50 years. The rest of the world is growing at half the rate or less. So the question is that the parts may not be the same. And for many markets, we believe that India optimistically is 5 years behind. Maybe in the telecom segment, we're 5 years behind. But in many other markets, we're 10 to 15 years behind where China is today. But if we can fix our major issues, then that big white hope of our demographic dividend can actually be leveraged. I think that's the key issue. So, could it be a reality? I don't know. If we sort of jog along like that, yes, maybe someday it could be a reality. I don't know. But that's the open question for everybody to debate. Okay? Thank you.
I would like to have a question about mergers and acquisitions in China.
Those are my subject.
Yeah, but
Ask the
generally,
question anyway.
it's related to juice and right? So that's the reason I'm actually asking you. So I remember in 2003, Coke actually went to actually acquire the biggest juice company in China, Yunian or something like that.
Yes.
And there was a huge major backlash from the public saying, how can a foreign brand actually come into our company and acquire the biggest brand? And then actually what happened is the hearing was actually being postponed for 3 months. And Pepsi, I think Coke at that point of time actually offered 3 times the worth price, the valuation of the company to actually acquire the company.
Yeah.
And still it failed.
Yeah.
After deliberation of 3 months. We wanted to understand the culture of why Chinese actually view like brands in such a manner that they don't really want to acquire a foreign company to acquire any of their brands.
See, I think the point is that firstly, 2 aspects to that. I think it is Coke's strategy to buy up competition. Right? So, for example, in India they bought up Coca-Cola, right? And Thumbs Up as a brand they killed. For a number of years, they never supported Thumbs Up. When Coca-Cola still could not make, and Coca-Cola, the brand versus Pepsi-Cola, the brand still could not make much headway, they brought back Thumbs Up. So now it's a true, Pepsi has done poorly because it's had a 2-pronged attack. It's got Coke and it's got Thumbs Up, attacking in both ways. So I'm not surprised that Coke wanted to buy up a local brand. But tell me, why would anybody want a favorite brand of theirs to be absorbed by another organization?
In India, it actually happens. For example, Pepsi or Coke can, Thumbs Up, for example, it acquired Thumbs Up, it killed Thumbs Up.
Yes.
But in China, it does not really happen. Like, they do not really allow brands to be actually being taken over by foreign brands. And
See,
at the same point of
again,
time,
I think in India, it's Campa Cola was an individual.
Yeah.
It was a private company. I don't think the government in India had any mechanisms to stop its sale at that point in time, and it also happened at a much earlier stage. Even today, I think if anybody wants to come and buy up Ambutanjan or whatever, I don't think the Indian government is in a position.
so is there a difference
The legal-
in terms of the strictness of the laws, like, or the or
No,
the,
I
or the
think
control
the
of the laws?
legal,
or what
the
is the
legal point,
mechanism?
I don't think anybody can stop them.
The largest juice company in China is called Wahaha. So I'm not sure. I think you're talking about the same company. So okay. So this is a just a private company, and I think the valuation was not acceptable. I mean that's the honest answer about this transaction. But generally, it is true. I think generally Chinese brands and the government are a little more nationalistic when it comes to this. And legally, there's a category called most traditional Chinese brands. There's a category of brands in the intellectual property laws of China which is given a higher status of protection, higher degree of protection, which basically means that if any foreign brand infringes that brand's right, the government will defend as if it's national property or national treasure. It's called time-honored brands. Time-honored brands. So if you go to Beijing, you will see famous duck restaurants called China time-honored brand. A lot of them used to be SOEs. Some of them are now privatized. So they have this nationalistic tendency of protecting some Chinese brands. Earlier it used to be because they were state-owned. Now they are privatized, but they're USP because there's nothing else to distinguish a drink or a juice from something else. So they'll say, okay, this is Chinese, so they try to sell the nationalistic sort of thing to improve their brand. So that's one element of it. And but there are also interesting brand stories in China. There is a herbal tea brand called Wang Laoji. So Wang Laoji was state-owned, and over a period of time they kept increasing their price because they got free press. All the Communist Party leaders would sit in meetings and put Wang Laoji in front of them and drink it in meetings. So there was a private entrepreneur who wanted to take them on. So he created some new brand called JBL. So the Chinese mass market took to JBL. It's a drink. So they boycotted Wang Laoji, and this had never happened. So then the Chinese government spoke to the entrepreneur and said, "Why don't you take over Wang Laoji and manage it? You seem to be doing quite well." So there are exceptions, but overall, I think China has this tendency to put nationalistic feelings into certain brands.
So
But
the
also
feeling
in
of
the-
nationalism is actually more in China rather than in India.
Oh,
In terms of,
definitely.
I think so.
government-
Yeah.
Definitely.
I think so. Yeah.
And the other thing is that in China, the people are not. I mean, I know there's dissent and all that is happening, but by and large, the people believe the state has done well by them. For most people, right? So that's a very different scenario from India. In India, people believe that when individual businesses are doing well, they're often doing well despite the state efforts.
That's a confusion value. I mean, that's just that government is a caretaker of the people. So in China, no matter how much they'll protest or how much they disagree, they will still look to government for guidance. Whereas in India, it's not the case.
In fact,
at all.
ads that run on the Chinese national channel are considered to be more credible than ads running on other channels. Okay? So people think that if the national channel carries these ads, it must be true. We don't have any such. So when Cadbury's had a problem with their product, they didn't use a minister or a government official. They used Amitabh Bachchan because he had more credibility than anybody else. So I think that's the difference.
They may allow you to take some minority stake because you're pumping money, but it stops there.
And I also remember in terms of the cultural sensitivity as well. Like for example, Starbucks, like it was selling in the Forbidden City, and they realized, they were actually selling, bringing Western culture into a place where it was very protected. They actually asked them to move out of Forbidden City, right? So also the cultural sensitivity is much more in China rather than India. It never happens in India.
But the question I have is related to the one you asked, that why, Can the Indian government ever stop an Indian private company from selling to whoever they like?
No.
I don't think our laws will allow them to.
India has nothing to protect Indian brands. Recently, in the retail regulation, just last month, they came up with this new definition, which even as a lawyer, I can't get my head around it. They have invented this concept called Indian brands, and they have used it left, right, and center in the regulations.
Okay, but define no definition.
There's no definition. This is the FDI policy. So maybe next year in April, when the annual FDI circular comes out, it will have some guidance. Because right now, if you see the day before Modi left for UK, they needed a sort of booster. So they unleashed these 11 reforms for FDI, saying this can be done, real estate, no caps. Yeah. So one of these things is suddenly that they have brought in the concept of Indian brands. And no foreign investment regulation in India so far had used that phrase.
Do they say Indian brands, or I thought this had a lot to do with the fact that there were Americans who were trying to do patents on Indian products like Chyawanprash or that kind of stuff.
That's geographic indicators
Yeah,
saying
something
if
like
some
that.
brand has originated with the region. That's a different debate.
Okay.
But this is very recent. This is basically about this FDI in retail. One of the conditions was that you have to localize something and all that. So there they have just brought in something saying if a foreign company buys an Indian brand, then they have to do so many things. But what is an Indian brand, we don't know. As you said, Amritanjan is an Indian brand, or Thumbs Up is an Indian brand. Why? Yeah.
You Iran brand.
So this I don't know. I think there is just lack of thinking.
As you say, maybe in April there will be more clarity.
Yeah,
Maybe I just wanted to.
something there's no clarity now.
I just wanted to put in one thing, but before that, I just wanted to share one of my experiences. I have taken, if you are in China normally, most of us visit the cities of China. And when we are moving as a tourist, we take the roads, etc. So I took a little detour, and in a Yunnan province, I took a typical passenger train from the Kunming railway station. And when I entered that, the immediate Kunming scenario changed. The people were differently clad, the quality of dresses, everything changed. I hopped into the train where I was supposed to go maybe around 4 hours of travel through that train. And contrary to that thing that we are more dirty, etc., the interesting point that I noted in that whole travel is that every few minutes, each of these Chinese families would eat a lot of things, throw it exactly. Indian Railways is no match for them. Indian Railways, if they are not groomed for a day, it will not look as worse as those trains which generates as much filth maybe in an hour. However, the saving grace was that there was a lady stationed in every compartment who will broom the thing every 5 minutes. She would come and broom that out. So culturally, possibly, if you are looking at Shanghai, Beijing, or for that matter even Qingdao, which we visit, or maybe even Kunming, possibly the other China is totally different from that. India possibly doesn't have so much of a dichotomy. I mean, if you look at Mumbai or Delhi, you would have seen both the groups living together, unlike in China.
So you're saying here everybody is dirty, and there only some are.
No, not really. I'm saying that there may be a little bit of the previous discussion that was there that we were restricted.
There is beautification.
There is beautification, and the outside.
There are slums in Beijing.
Yeah, and maybe as I was traveling, I saw that between the mountains there's this pools and flyovers which have 3 levels: one for the heavier trucks, one for the moderate trucks, and one for the passenger vehicles. And on the other side, you have as bad slums and village houses as we have in India. But that beyond the point. As far as the Chindia point is concerned, there is an interesting coincidence that happened. The Indian government talks of Make in India now, and that's becoming a pet project. However, quite recently, the Chinese Communist Party has also come in this thing, Made in China 2025. And the whole idea of this Made in China 2025 is that the Chinese production, they would like to move up in the value chain. So they would want to go to a more sophisticated product. And their target is possibly looking at the Japanese or German sort of sophistication. And the target is that they would reach in somewhere around 2025. Now something maybe we can ponder about. If that happens, then possibly certain things China would leave around, which were maybe lower end in the value chain. And maybe
pick up.
Yeah, maybe India can pick them up, because India is looking for an entry into the manufacturing where we're talking of textile, leathers and things like that, which are not too much high in sophistication or in the manufacturing value chain. So that might be another place where really China and India, rather than a confrontalist or rather than a competitor, might become actually a collaborator in the ecosystem where China goes into the high end and India picks up what China thinks. That's something I came across in some points. Maybe.
This is already happening.
Okay.
So this is already happening. About 4-5 years ago, India had a regulation which said that import of second-hand machinery can be considered as consideration other than cash under foreign investment regulations. And at about the same time, China's launched this policy of relocating all the polluting industries from the eastern seaboard to the interior provinces. And they used to give heavy subsidies, and they still do. So a typical scenario during that period was a lead acid battery plant, which is heavily polluting. If that factory was somewhere along the coast, they would have to take it to Xinjiang or somewhere, which is basically chunking it. So they can't really have production every day to that level. So they started bringing it to India. Because in India, something that is completely outdated and can't be used in China, here was state of the art. So this Chinese company, this is a real scenario. A Chinese company came, they visited about the top 3 or 4 battery makers, automotive battery makers in India, their factories, and they were shocked. They said these machines are what we were using 10-15 years ago. Some of our factories still have it, but we have just switched it off because we can't run them. They're heavily polluting. So it was like a eureka moment. So for about 6 months or 9 months, every Chinese company was trying this, getting all their outdated equipment to India, because here you just bring that and set it up, and you get a local partner to fund the operations. And he will give you equity for that entire junk, which is basically junk in China, and the transportation cost is not so much. If you get an integrated plant, it's minimal. The cost of equipment may be $20 million, but the transportation may be $500,000. So if the Chinese company spent $500,000, it's almost as good as investing $20 million in India. So this is an arbitrage opportunity. For 9 months they milked it. A lot of people did this. And then RBI woke up and said second-hand machinery is not allowed. They cited reasons that you can't...
Environment.
But I think RBI did not quote environment. RBI said it is difficult to ascertain value of second-hand machinery, and the CA certificates that we receive for these machinery can't be relied upon. So therefore we scrap it. But I think the real concern has to be environment.
They put a Ministry of Environment.
Yeah, so they would have said that.
For any second-hand machines.
Yeah, so they would have said. So right now we can't do that. So, but there was a short window where this arbitrage was happening.
So, but do you think that this made-in dash in both these countries happening together would have some effect going forward, maybe in the next 10 years?
But isn't it that the two are different? As you yourself said, the Chinese are now aiming at a different level of manufacture, with robotics, etc., even in the garment industry. We've been dreaming about rich countries and developed countries vacating certain manufacturing areas in favor of developing countries. And we thought we were at the top of the line. This goes back to the 60s and 70s. You don't remember, of course. But in those days, this was very much a slogan that was used during the famous development decade, etc., etc., in which was prime mover was one Roychoudhury, Dubey, a colleague of mine. It was even known as Dubey's decade. He was the rapporteur of the committee, of the UN committee that dealt with the first development decade. It was a very big, ambitious project in the 70s. We now talk of garment industry. While we are talking about all this, Bangladesh has pipped us to the post. Bangladesh is the world's second largest exporter of garments. I don't know if you knew that. And India is somewhere 4 or 5 down the chain. Because we tie our hands. We are extremely good at handicapping ourselves. Our small-scale industry regulations, what's called as small-scale industry reservation policy, and it really cripples the industry. So you have manufacturers who have 6 labels on a single plant, so that when the inspector comes, you can give him X amount of rent, and he will certify that these are 6 separate units. They just happen to be owned by Santosh, but they are not one unit really. So, I mean, we have a dream that we can do these things, and it can be done, but I don't know if we are ready to take advantage of the opportunities.
But maybe on a little contrarian view, today, this morning, we talked really about the Chinese, the laborers, the issue of equity. Since you mentioned about Bangladesh, Bangladesh is going through a real crisis in their garment industry when this happened, and I happened to be in Bangladesh at that point of time. When the Bangladesh government's whole idea was that, and in fact they were looking at Indian companies, if Indian companies can give them consultancy on how to improve their this ghetto-like, this sweatshop-like sort of a thing, because that really hampered them, and Bangladesh government was really worried whether they are going to lose that second position in the world. Now, if that sort of thing happens, and what my colleague in the morning has also pointed out, that at some point of time, if the equity differentiation is so high, doesn't that come as a challenge moving ahead?
You want to check and discuss it? Or I need to discuss it.
I mean, since morning I've been talking and pointing out so many things. I thought that I don't need to exercise my right to be discussant in this session. Not really, but I will just add what Santosh was also saying, and I think he was talking about the second-hand machines, or maybe broadly what are the areas actually India and China both can work out together. I just want to bring one non-China, maybe China area, that is Taiwan. We often forget about Taiwan when we broadly discuss about China. If you look at Taiwan's role in Chinese manufacturing or Chinese role, its emergence in global value chain or global production network is this actually. Most of the times we overlook Taiwan's role over here, and it happens so because Taiwan and Chinese both have this. They both have this bad habit of multiplying manufacturing, multiplying what over 20 years, and not really think about how they can be part of a global production network. Whereas in India, any factory or any big company would always think about how it would contribute or how it would attribute to the global production network. Now, what is happening apparently is the most of the Chinese factories, companies are fixed. I'm talking about manufacturing. They're not relying on Taiwanese companies, and Taiwanese companies also raise their hands actually, because Taiwanese companies always complain to China that because of your political stand, we couldn't go and be part of WTO, be part of APEC or any other thing. Now we are over dependent. Now we have invested heavily, 150 billion, and then we are heavily dependent on you. Your trade is heavily dependent on us. The way to go. India is the best option. To come to what Kushi was presenting actually, India is the best option. Why? Because if you look at India's stand, India's position, or India's regulatory mechanism, India favors Taiwan more than China. I don't want to differentiate between Taiwan's compliances and China's compliances. So it's a difference in India. In Hindi, we call it Unis Biska. Taiwanese have a problem with compliances also, but they perform a little bit better. But India has a bigger role to play over here to be, to give space to Chinese manufacturing, because Chinese manufacturing are looking for places to go out, and they cannot go to Vietnam because of simply now the Basav was talking about TPP and things like that. So the best option they have is India. Now in India, and Santosh has been part of lots of negotiations. Tomorrow will be the, like in Olympic, the last day is only for athletics. Tomorrow will be athletics.
It's too much
100 meters, 200 meters, 400 meters relay and things like that. So you will have lots of things for tomorrow. I'll leave it for tomorrow. So I'll leave it there for tomorrow. But you will listen that Chinese companies are eager to come to India, but there are lots of issues. whether that has to do with the mentality which we have toward Chinese manufacturing companies or Chinese companies as such.
China coming in any fashion.
Yeah, any fashion. And understand this thing that China if Chinese manufacturing is not coming in, Chinese investment is coming in. Chinese investment is not coming in. The private equity will come and give funding to the new startup companies. Anyway, it is coming. In Latin American country, it is not in, if you forget about trade, if you forget about investment, China has devised a completely new concept, new idea actually. Nobody would ever think about bilateral currency swap agreements, which is beyond investments. And China's bilateral currency agreements with outside world is equivalent to 50% of its trade. These BCS helps China to retain its trade share in the world. They are sure this 53% is not going to go anywhere, even if we slow down. So I don't want to glorify Chinese over here or their IT or their intelligence over here, but that's a fact. They have devised something which we even can't think about. And they were in agriculture, they were in mining. Now, more than that, they are in agriculture and mining. They are investing in, they are trying to put so much fund. Now, the PBOC declared there will be a core fund about 20 billion as far as Latin American countries are concerned. So, as Ambassador said correctly, they are going to come in anyway. We need to be prepared actually. And as managers, let me conclude my discussion points by saying that you will be dealing with all this pressure actually. You need to know this. Chinese companies are coming, what they're thinking, how we should be better prepared to take the challenges. And that is where I think such interactions are going to help you tremendously.
Can I add a word? I'm sorry to again speak, but taking off exactly from what Aravind said, that if you were sitting in Beijing with a large pot of money, which China is, is it 4 now? $4 trillion reserves. Where can you employ your funds? How many places are there where you can get profit out of your fund? You can invest in Africa. Some profits will come, but the certitude is not that strong. And the depth of that market in terms of receiving the monies is finite. Receiving at a profit, not receiving and receiving. Latin America, again, fine opportunities. They are going there in a big way. China is talking about investing in Central America. We don't have a single embassy anywhere in Central America, except in Mexico. Mexico is part of Central America. Not one. 5 Central American countries have embassies in India. In the diplomacy business, embassies are set up essentially on a reciprocal basis. You come to my country, I come to yours. Very few countries can retain the attitude that I will not come because I have my own fundas, my own problems. Singapore is that exception. Singapore says we will not open any more new embassies. We don't have the people. We have money. Money available in plenty, but we don't have the people. So Singapore says we will not open. So you have an imbalance in the number of embassies you receive and you send out. It's a very interesting little indicator, which I call the index of diplomatic intensity. Nobody's ever thought of this figure, so I've invented my own phrase. I couldn't find a better one. Not a very good one actually. But what it says is how much the world needs you and how much you need the world. Washington receives about 170 embassies, but Washington sends out only 150. Because Washington says, hey, you're a small little country, I really don't have to be present in your country. But you may need me because you have your reasons to come to America. Nobody in India has written about this. I have, but nobody reads that. India sends out today bilateral embassies. I'm not talking of missions to New York or to Geneva. Those are multilateral missions. They are called permanent missions. India has about 115, 116 embassies abroad. New Delhi is home to more than 140 embassies. And this has shifted in the last 10 years. Because I've constantly written and tracked and published data on this. So in the last 10 years, a lot of countries, small countries have woken up and said, we can't afford not to be present in India. So they come to India. But India says, look, I mean, we have a shortage of resources. We are a hugely under-resourced diplomatic service. We are one of the most under-resourced diplomatic services in the world. Nobody talks about it. Well, few people do. Parliament or the finance ministry. The finance ministry is the Dada of India, really, and not even the Prime Minister of India. That and the Foreigners Division of the Home Ministry. These are the two guys who hold tenders. The finance ministry for 2 years refused to create posts so that we could create in India a single foreign aid mechanism. So MEA was tiny. Finally, they scrounged around and shifted posts from hither and thither and created something called the Development Partnership Administration. It's one of our real successes. For the first time, the DPA has employed people from the private sector. MEA not only opened itself up to other ministries, which we've done, but private sector. And there are about 15 people, 20 people working in the Development Partnership Administration who are from outside the ministry, in a ministry which had steadfastly been a fortress which would not accept any outsider within the MEA. So all that is changing. But we are still grossly under-resourced. We have approximately less than 1,000 what we call representation grade officers. That is third secretary and above in an embassy abroad or its equivalent at headquarters, out of which 710 or 720 are in the foreign service, others are IFSB grade 1, and some of the other smaller services that we have, the research cadre, etc., etc. Brazil, which has a smaller number of embassies than we have, and Brazil is not a greater power than India. I'm not comparing ourselves with France or Germany or anybody else. Brazil has 1,500 diplomats. Their embassies are bigger. Now, you have an embassy, you have an ambassador and 1.5 people to support him. There is not that much they can deliver, particularly if you are in a small mission in Africa where local staff is also of good quality, local staff may not be available. Now, these are, you may say, little issues of detail. And what about China? 7,000 diplomats. So, I mean, why do we tie our own hands? And this is such a small matter, you know. If you take our numbers from 1,000 to 1,200, 1,400, it will make a substantial difference in what we deliver. And this is the notion of diplomatic capacity. That is, how many issues can you negotiate? There was a foreign secretary who said, in a fairly open conversation with friends, he said, we can only handle one major negotiation at a time. How can we work like this? You have to negotiate with Pakistan, negotiate with the United States, you have to negotiate with 3 other countries, you are negotiating trade agreements. Now, you can say the Commerce Ministry will do it, but you need other people to keep track of this, climate issues, etc., etc. So, sorry, I'm going on for too long, but basically, we have a great capacity to tie our own hands and not create the necessary infrastructure to do better. And it only needs a little incremental amount of money. You know, we go and make commitments in Myanmar. Case in point. We know this in ECIM. We have made commitments to build roads in Myanmar. Finance Ministry does not sanction money. Officially approved projects promised by the Prime Minister, this Prime Minister of India. Finance Ministry says no, no money, apply next year. Now, how can we work with a foreign country? We made a commitment publicly that we'll build a road or we'll build bridges in Myanmar, one of our closest, most neglected countries. And here in the northeast, at least, we should think about Myanmar. Nobody bothers. And this, nobody even writes about this. Because this is not news. But if a crow flies to Pakistan, then that's big news.
Thanks. So I'd just like to come back to Kushi's topic and ask you to make an assessment. Okay. Is then Chindia possible? You end by saying could be a reality someday, but in the light of the discussion that has gone, one, of course, the notion of Chindia. I mean, is it, what are we talking about when we say Chindia? We're talking of a joint economic bloc. We're talking of interspersed economic structures which are working in tandem in a globalized economy. We are talking of contributing together to the transformation of what we feel are unfair structures. So what is it that really Chindia would do in terms of value maximization in the global economy? And the second would be that from a marketing point of view, if this is a good thing and it should be pushed along, then from a marketing point of view, how do you project brand Chindia?
I think a couple of things to it. Firstly, I think to a lot of people, the word Chindia seems to connote that we are similar and on the same point, right? That, I think, we, at the end of today, should have no doubt about is not the case, right? Okay. The second point that you're making, or rather the last point that you made, is whether Chindia should be a bloc, like, for the lack of a better comparison, the EU. No? I don't know if that's also ever going to be possible, because with two superpowers, or one superpower and one aspiring superpower, I doubt very much that we will ever be seen as one brand of Chindia. And we're too large, anyway, to be together as a brand. I think where there is possibility is in some form of seeing the two markets in like different points in a continuum, and therefore to some extent the spillover, maybe not dumping their cheap products or their obsolete machinery, but there may be more cooperation possible. Whether attitudinally the two will mesh, I don't know. You guys are culturally more aware of the issues. I have my doubts whether there will be, whether India will ever accept a superior China role with India as a country. I doubt very much that that's going to happen. Yeah? But I think for the point I'm trying to make is that from a marketing perspective, let's say for Western manufacturers, right? For them, yes, certainly the way the China market has grown, the Indian market can be expected to grow the same way in some for some categories, not all. So that is a someday get to the same level. Yeah?
All right, I think I need to get back to my role. Well, before we break and come back again, because there's a younger group eagerly waiting to meet all of you, especially. Before we do that and we come back, because 6:30 they're supposed to be here for a cultural thing, and we're expecting a group from one of the local schools here, so very young ones. But before we break to meet them, come back and meet them, I think there's a significant number who's just been listening
they need to start.
They should
They need to.
On their
Yeah, that's important. So, yeah, please.
I think that's enough. Use the other one or just
Yeah.
speak without that.
Hello ma'am, hello sir. Since morning we have been listening to your good lectures and we came to learn much more about it. I have 3 questions to the 3 speakers. First question is to Alka ma'am. Ma'am, you talked about this closed society with open minds, right? And I would like to ask you a question that since this lot many social networking sites, even you cannot open the Google, in fact, in China. So how can you expect this open minds of Chinese in this regard? First question to ma'am, to you. Second question is to
Why
Sanghamitra.
don't we get each answer?
Okay, right.
Okay, see, no, you keep it because I'll speak out loud. The point was a limited one, and limited to the extent that how has the state in China controlled this whole process of engagement, but at the same time transformed the way in which it has both learned from, absorbed from, and implemented those kind of ideas and requirements to become a great economic giant. And the second thing is that what they are saying is that we will control these channels. It's not that there's a complete clampdown because they knew they can't do that. But we will control it because at this point, I mean, the perspective in which this is the time when China needs to have a stable environment. Stability is something they prize above every other qualification in the country. So to maintain that stability, we need to control things which could easily make the environment more unstable. So it's a very controlled and a very authoritarian system, which is permitting. So to that extent, yes, it can be seen as a contradiction in terms that you're not allowing your people to freely interact with the world. But at the same time, they have made major strides, and that has not really stopped them from absorbing what they need. So yes, it is a bit of a contradictory situation.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, my second question to Sanghamitra ma'am. Ma'am, you mentioned about the taxation system in China, and because people in China prefer to buy rather than sell because of this taxation system. I mean, you mentioned taxation highs there.
No, what I said was that luxury goods are have heavy duties when they're sold in China.
Okay.
So the same luxury product would be cheaper to buy in Hong Kong or even in Europe, in the UK, than it would be to buy in China.
Okay.
That is why the Chinese buy heavily when they travel, and now with e-commerce, they're buying online from foreign websites, and to save on shipping costs, they are group buying.
Okay.
So 5 or 6. So because obviously, shipping costs, if you buy in bulk, then is more economical than to buy one product.
I think I got you wrong then. And my third question to Rana sir is that, sir, we normally in India and China both we see that India's west is more developed and China's east is more developed. And now India is looking forward to develop its eastern part, and China is looking forward to develop its western part. So how does this thing is happening? Because recently we have heard that the present government has introduced a railway in the northeastern part to develop the eastern region, northeastern region especially. And so how this China is developing its western part? So can I have your views on this?
I think you put your finger, and then you don't need to kind of pass it to somebody else in the group also. I think you put your finger on a very interesting convergence of possibilities, because China is developing its western part, because China is actually a quasi-landlocked country. It's the only large power in the world, geographically large and also economically, which only has access along one axis of its entire territory, and that is the eastern part. And overall, one belt, one road, one of its objectives is also the development of the western regions of China. India has grossly neglected the northeast. I don't have to say that sitting in the northeast. Not all of you are from the northeast, but you've been here long enough to know the reality. The fact that not 1 kilometer of railway track has been added to the stock, although many projects are right now under implementation, is proof of that. The tragedy is that there are many people whose minds are closed in the way when it comes to substantially working through the northeast with the eastern part of Asia. China first, but also Southeast Asia. It's not limited to one country. They say, China aa jayega. China will take over the northeast. Are we so lacking in confidence in ourselves and in our own people that we fear the entry of China? And we are not opening the northeast exclusively for Chinese investments. In fact, the government of India is very wisely, when Prime Minister Abe was last in India, and that was a year ago, almost exactly, and he comes again in 2 weeks' time, or 1 week's time. We have specially invited Japan to come and invest in the northeast, because we do want the northeast to be a playground for many investments, including Indian investments, which have also not taken place. So you are absolutely right. There is a potential convergence, and the PCIM economic corridor is really an opportunity for doing things together. But I will tell you candidly, the biggest obstacle to this is thinking among some people in India who visualize security as being undermined if we open up the northeast. The tragedy is that when you build a road, anybody can travel on the road. You don't have a road which says, oh, that's a Chinese truck coming, so the road folds up and rolls up and climbs up the nearest tree. You don't have roads like that. Thailand underwent the same mental dilemmas. When Thailand started its cooperation with China, there were people who said, but Chinese tanks will come down these roads. And the days of tanks coming down roads into other countries are really belong to the past. We have to have confidence in ourselves that we will manage our relations with other countries, including problem countries, in such a way that we will not let such an eventuality come to pass. Whether it is China, Pakistan or anybody else. If we don't trust ourselves, who are we going to trust?
My question is to Khushi ma'am. We learned that Chinese are less sensitive to price promotions, and we also know that they have got high saving rates. So, in your experience, what type of strategies you have seen working for the promotion?
Well, actually, the kind of immediate, direct price discounting is something that we know in the long run, in any case, undervalues a brand. Okay? Repeated price discounts. And China went through that phase, where companies, in the modern trade particularly, the incentive to buy in bulk was because of lower prices. But what we're now seeing is that people are getting more brand loyal and therefore less price sensitive. And typically that's how it works. So promotions can be of different kinds, other than price. You can have competitions, you can have people, and sometimes you don't even need promotions, right? I mean, you don't, luxury brands will rarely do any promotions, because the promotion can be of an emotional gratification. So you can, I think somebody here did this as well. You get to have dinner with Shah Rukh Khan, some such thing. That's a type of promotion. So there are different ways in which you can approach promotion. First, you have to question whether you need a promotion at all, and then see what kind of promotion meets with your brand objectives.
And Shri sir, to you, like the same question, how you have seen in your experience, like for the technology, because FMCG will be, I think, different in China.
I think from a strategy point of view, if someone wants to go and then figure out what you need to do in China, right? You need to first figure out what is your entry strategy and what is that you want to achieve. If you say that I will go there and then be a cost player, you'll know the results. Right? You can't actually beat them on some segments where they have kind of beaten the entire world. It could be in terms of construction, manufacturing, your fabs. I don't think anyone can match the technical capability and the hard-working capability of that particular region. There are areas where they are not strong today, where they are looking for partnerships. That could be with India, that could be with Japan, that could be with US, that could be with those are the technology-sensitive areas. The IT, the software, the core banking, where they want to actually invest, they want to learn. That's why I think the partnerships that we spoke about, NIIT partnership. We have officers there, they come and try to understand what do we do. Because they know that the future is not in manufacturing and service, but the future is in software. The economy is going to go tenfold because of software, not because of manufacturing. Manufacturing becomes a commodity. So I think they are realizing the importance of investing in the technology things, and they know what are the limitations that they have today. They have not opened up to the world in terms of education, the multinational exposure, the IT systems, everything is very localized. I think that's where one would see opportunities, one where you can actually go, invest, make money.
Sir, my question is to Parimal sir. As we were discussing about the hookah policy, so is China government going to relax that policy under their 13th five-year plan or partially or fully?
I mean, I don't know whether they will relax it soon or not, but ultimately they have to relax the hookah system because they do not have any other alternative. And now the workers also, they also tend to stay more. Earlier, there was a tendency to go back to the rural areas, but now they actually want to continue their staying in the urban area for a longer period, more than 1 year, continuing up to 2-3 years or so. So they want, I mean, anyhow the workers are illegally staying there. So now it's the thing of converting illegal thing into a legal one. So they do not have any other option, but they have to do it soon. And I think again in this respect, the initiatives would come more from the city and provincial governments, and then there would be a national level policy. They would keep on experimenting it, and then they will come out with a policy in the longer term.
There's already been some announcements that they will.
Yeah, they are talking about it. They are definitely talking about it.
They're thinking of 25% of the benefits in the urban area, 25% of the benefits that children's education
Yes.
is allocated to the rural areas, now going to be provided in the urban areas.
Yes, true.
I have one question regarding the, I know we are speaking more about Indo-Sino conflict, specific question to Rana sir. In terms of China's relation with Pakistan, and where actually, we have already known that, from historical that Pakistan is more closer to China in terms of relationships. Like, how does that, this three-way relationship actually develop? Like, how does China look towards India in terms of relationship, and how does it look towards Pakistan? Especially like whatever the development they did in Gwadar, the port, and how they developed in Pakistan, right? And the entire Karakoram highway and all those relationships. How do you actually look at it?
Let me turn the question around. China is right now committed, a few months ago, to investing $46 billion in Pakistan. Do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing for India?
Good thing.
What do you think? Good thing or a bad thing for India?
For the Southeast Asian region?
No, India. I'm asking you about India. I'm not talking about Southeast Asia. I'm trying to pin you down. You tell me, is it good for India or bad for India? Or is it indifferent?
No. Looking at the history of what Pakistan has been doing for India, it is a bad thing. I would say.
Alright.
But
Okay. Now you made your choice. Now okay. Now my question to you is, if Pakistan implodes, if Pakistan falters, is torn by Baluchistan rising up, by internal dissent, by its Islamists running riot in the country as they have been doing in part, is that good for India or bad for India?
that will be bad.
Okay, now that's my point. That in German there is a word called Schadenfreude. In one word, it sums up a whole complex emotion. There is no equivalent in English. It means, I rejoice in your misfortune. Okay? So Schadenfreude is something that is a natural human emotion, particularly vis-a-vis people we don't like. You know, if I like you, then I'm happy that you are doing well, that you got a promotion, and I will sincerely say, you know, congratulations. If I don't like you, then I'll say, Salam, does he really deserve it? I mean, Bhavani, I will say nice words to you, but basically, I think it's the stupidest thing that's happened. But Schadenfreude cannot be the basis of policy between neighbors. Neighbors are given by God, given by geography. You can't unzip your country from one location and say, "Nahi yaar, hum to North America jayenge, we'll zip our country up in Canada." Can't do that. My point is that let us shed old thinking and let us ask ourselves that a prosperous Pakistan, a more stable Pakistan, and a richer Pakistan, might it be a country that will be easier to work with for India?
Yes, sir.
Because we have to be confident that we will continue to forge ahead. Pakistan is not going to hold us up. I don't think Pakistan has that capacity. It never had it, and it has much less capacity today. And Pakistanis understand that. There was a Pakistani business delegation that came to India about 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And the leader of this delegation said in a TV interview in front of everybody, he said the Indian train is leaving the station. Our choice is either we climb on board or we'll be left standing at the station and the train will have left. Which was a graphic way for a Pakistani head of business delegation to describe it at a World Economic Forum meeting, actually. So, what I'm trying to say is, let us look at these kind of developments, China-Pakistan investments, from a slightly enlightened perspective, in terms of our interest, not Southeast Asia or anybody else, our own interest. Of course, the Chinese investment may fail. That is a possibility, that if insurgency is not controlled, internal dissent is not controlled, the Pakistanis have promised 12,000 troops, specially mobilized to protect Chinese investments, etc. But let's hope that it does work, because after all, the prosperity of neighbors is a reflection of our prosperity. The Malaysians actually use a phrase in their relations with neighboring countries in ASEAN. And ASEAN, for all its limitations that it has not promised, it has not delivered on everything promised, ASEAN is an extraordinary success. Because today we forget that when ASEAN was formed in 1967, every one of those 5 regional ASEAN countries was in dispute with the other four. Each one had disputes. And today, that age of disputes is over. Yes, Thailand and Cambodia have a small little territorial issue, but it's a small, piddling little issue. Malaysia's slogan is, prosper thy neighbor, which is that in my neighbor's prosperity lies my prosperity. Isn't it time for India to think in these terms, not only towards Pakistan, towards Nepal, towards Bangladesh? And we have not really, ask ourselves, have we really looked at events in our neighborhood from a perspective of prosperity of our neighbors? Why did it take a Gujju former chief minister to come to New Delhi and offer a slogan which nobody in New Delhi had ever used before, which is neighborhood first? Two simple words. It changes the paradigm in which we deal. We thought we will connect with the world and neighborhood like hardly. Frankly, that has been the attitude of India for the last 20 odd years. Not that we want to run down other countries, but we weren't particularly interested in their welfare. Do you know that no Indian Prime Minister made a bilateral visit to Nepal for 27 years? Do you know that since the incident where Rajiv Gandhi was unfortunately attacked but fortunately saved by a guard in the Guard of Honor with a rifle, you remember that incident? In 1986, no Indian Prime Minister had made a bilateral visit to Sri Lanka. Is this how we deal with neighbors? We have Indian leaders who have gone on visits to Finland, Romania, Hungary and Bulgaria. But they didn't find time to go to Nepal and Sri Lanka because they said it's too far.